Let's get into some more foolishness here. Where we're at is realhistorywww.com. This is not real history, but blacks want to make you think it's so. And so we're going to look into this foolishness. Now, the reason I chose this site are because I've already done one on this before on their main page. These are the idiots that called all the white people albino Dravidians, if you'll remember. And if you don't, well, we're about to refresh you slightly on it. But apparently, all whites are albino negroids. And during this, he's going to flip flop and show you that it's not true at all. But then he's going to he can't come up with the logic of it and flop back the other way. This is probably going to be a 2 or 3 parter, but the reason that I chose this one is that he does actually have a lot of real knowledge inside this. And when he gets into the ancient Proto-Indo-Europeans, he definitely shows you the attachments that are there. It works pretty good. I think it's off a dissertation that was in the early 70s, mid 70s. And although he doesn't seem to put a citation on it or anything. But yeah, well, so let's look into this foolishness. He tells you ancient man and his first civilizations, the original black cultures of Eastern Europe and Asia, and their first contacts with the invading albino people of Central Asia. Yeah, albino. So all these people that tan every year and stuff, they're all albinos. Or they somehow come from albino Negroes. So we is all Negroes now. But let's continue. Oh, I have to mention, he has a new deep search up here that he has. And so you can search all of real history. And it's a new deep search, which is exactly the same as the old just regular search, but he put the words new and deep in front of it, and therefore kind of looks like an advertising gimmick where you have new and improved, and all you've done is really kind of pointed out. But let's continue. So he starts off with a very important point here. He says, is this worth reading? Is this true? And I'll tell you after perusing it that no and no. But we're going to do it anyhow. Now, he has ruined his website here due to some of his source code, and I could tell you where it is, but it won't even fit on the screen correctly. It actually, if you'll look at this, I can't get it to fit on the screen correctly. So I'm going to have to read in that manner and everything, but we're going to go through this trouble. Apparently, he hasn't learned how to code yet. So he says, the matter of credibility on first reading, readers of these pages generally feel amazement. The concept of blacks being the original settlers and builders of the first civilizations everywhere, including Europe, is particularly unsettling to them, both black and white, because they were taught that there were no blacks in Europe until the Romans brought them. Then some blacks correctly say, I knew the whites were lying, and then go on to enjoy their edification. But whites remain incredulous. They say, this is simply blacks with no history. What is it doing? Or accomplishments, trying to steal white accomplishments and history, which we've seen rampantly. They thought they was Egyptians, was Hebrews, was Moors, was everything, and really were no part of any of those civilizations. And this guy's just going to make a leap right past that and say, you're all just albino Negroes. So if this is actually in effect, people, then all the racism's out, and apparently the light Negroes are the more intelligent ones that can fly and do everything, and everything's still set up right, and we're still cool, and there's no problem with this. And it's not racism because they're our same people. So you see, they just need to shut up. But we'll continue. He tells you, they say if this was true, my teachers and professors would have taught it to me. So either this is lies, or the information is so new that my teachers and professors didn't know about it yet. There's, of course, a lot of options other than those two. But Negroids without logic like to think that there isn't another option, like maybe, or these are jealous, covetous Negroids that don't have a history, and so it's all misinformation meant to make blacks racist, hateful people and try to live a lie because they don't think that their original West African heritage is worth talking about. And so, which is somewhat in play in comparison with other people, but everybody had to have an origin, and one people had to have been a little bit more advanced. It turns out it's a lot more advanced. I have heard that these Caucasians can fly now. I know it sounds crazy, but you can go on YouTube and there's these videos. It's amazing. And then I saw in the sidebar, now I don't know if it's CGI or something, but they showed that Whitey can go into space, and he went to the moon and came back, and I don't know, I just think it's all just some crazy YouTube video crap, but what do y'all think? Anyhow, it's just crazy talk, right? So, here we go. Update 2016. For reasons unknown, the British have decided to break with the Albino Pact and agreed to teach that blacks were the original settlers of Europe. No, that's not true. This is a click, and it'll actually lead you to them trying to talk about how Brahman and Cheddar Man might have had more olive skin than perhaps, say, Scandinavians do currently. And people lost their mind, and then they shoe polished up apparently a Caucasian with blue eyes, and they shoe polished him up, and really that's been totally debunked. Within a week of it coming out, it got debunked, and then there was all these formal people that came out and said things, and that totally got redacted. But here go Blax trying to attach onto that and go, look, white people had tans. It's like, well, yeah, we get good tans like that today too, but it's terrible what they try to go through. For reasons unknown, after years of the usual racist nonsense, I guess he's talking about black people, Wikipedia has allowed articles indicating the true origin of Asia, Europe, and white people and albinos. What you'll find is that he showed you here the migration period and the Kurgan hypothesis, as we've been talking about, and you can click and look on wiki articles. So now, believe it or not, they can't be held back anymore. Actually, they're going to tell you about these Proto-Indo-Europeans. They won't say the word Aryan so much anymore, but it will be in the article. And this is the stuff that World War II happened partly because of, and so on. But everybody wants to say it's all about that, when it really wasn't. And then everybody wants to say, well, it's all about, just like in the Civil War, it was all about slavery, and it really wasn't. You look into, we even made a video on it. Abraham Lincoln shows you, he said he didn't really want to get rid of slavery, and didn't think blacks would ever be able to vote, and that we'd never get along with each other, and that we couldn't coexist, and that blacks would have to go back. But that's a whole nother video you can look up on that. Well, he tells you, no, it may be comforting to believe that your teachers and professors are sufficient character and they would not lie to you, and the facts to support a conclusion. So he's trying to tell you that all the teachers everywhere, even the black ones, are all misled, and he, in his super knowledge, has figured out that we're all albino Negroes. We was. Kangz. So, the exhibits below attest to the fact that this knowledge was known for 100 years ago. Oh no. So somewhere in the 1900s. So either your teachers and professors are indeed liars, or they were poorly educated. Well, how about some of the education they thought of in the early 1900s has been debunked with much better education? You know, I have mentioned we can fly now, supposedly, and we figured out the universe and stuff, and we're not just even in a galaxy and stuff, and biblical stuff, and people back then thought it was all just a scattering of stars and didn't really have the idea down. And we're not going to start flip-flopping knowledge of now to then and things, but I bet we do during this. Let's continue. Again, I'm going to do this in a couple of parts, and I'm just going to let this go till it cuts, unless I find a perfect spot. And so if it cuts, we'll just start number 2 after, and I will try to do this in a series, and we'll try to do them back to back. So I'll do them as a release, and the next one will come out with just in a few minutes. And within a few minutes, and we'll go from there. Origin and evolution. Here's what somebody said back in the early 1900s. But gentlemen, it was in Africa that the little pygmy was first evolved from the Pithecanthus erectus, or an anthropoid ape. So this is what we're calling hominids now. So they have something to do with Homo, or people that are on the Homo line. In the Nile Valley and around the lakes at the head of the Nile, which in this lecture, for the sake of brevity, style Old Egypt. For here these little men spread all over the world, north, east, south, and west, until not only Africa, but Europe, Asia, North and South America, and Oceania were populated by them. Now, when he's talking about these people, he's not talking about pygmy negroids, even though there are pygmy negroids there. He's talking about Caucasians. When they talk about the out of Africa theory, no one ever had negroids in the out of Africa theory. The negroids were the ones that stayed in Africa. But people back in the 1900s tried to figure out how it all came from one and wanted to put a biblical idea onto it. So how could you do it? Because they knew that the Noah story's busted. They know the Hamite thing's totally busted. But then maybe there's some way to do it in this way. So he says, he was the first, the little red man of the earth. And then so this would be Adamic people. This would be your pale Adamic people. Adamic means red, but from the pygmy, evolution continued progressively in the following order: Bushmen, Masaba Negroes, Nilotic Negroes, Maasai, Mongoloids, and then so-called Aryanists. Why would they be ists instead of Aryanoids, or just Aryans? Aryanists sounds like somebody who's all caught up in Aryanism, doesn't it? I think that word's wrong, but we'll continue. Outside of Africa, they still exist, and he underlines it. So what? Well, they exist in New Guinea, New Hebrides, the forest of Bolivia in South America, the mountains in China, the Philippine Islands, the Sakais in the Malay Peninsula in northern India. They've been exterminated in Europe, North America, Japan, Australia, and Tasmania, but I have no doubt they are to be found in other places yet to be explored. They are not Negroes, but Negrillos or Negritos. So they are dark-skinned people, but they're not Negroes. So what's he talking about? Well, it's because he saw people in India and things that had darker skin, and now we know those aren't related to Negroids in any way either. Those are people from India, and the Indians have a Dravidian mix into them that imparts them with that. And of course, North India was controlled by the Aryans that had come in, and a great big war, and they recorded in their Mahabharata, right? It's the whole thing. And that the darker people rebelled and caused, but then they got everything all together, and then the people left, and they made an incredible culture out of this, and something that's quite unique. And it's somewhere in between a Middle Eastern, Persian, and a Chinese or Oriental type thing, but it's unique in its own set. And I think we all appreciate and respect that, but let's continue. He said, we will take an look at anatomical features first. The tall race of Europeans who came up from Egypt were an exodus of the Turkana. While these Nilotic Negroes are still found in Africa, a fine race of men, some of them over 7 feet in height, very muscular and powerful, have high foreheads, large eyes, rather high cheekbones, mouths not very large, and well shaped, lips rather full. The Cro-Magnon man of Europe. No. So what they were doing at this time, see, he's looking at Albert Churchward from 1912, and at this time they considered Negroes to be the missing link. Yeah, now that would be just totally racist, but they looked at Negroids as being the missing link and some type of throwback situation, and like how we had all come, and you can still see a remnant of these people that aren't even caved there. Wow, look at that. You know, and that would be extremely racist now, but he's latching on to that concept. And but he's also telling you that they had the exodus out of Europe right there plainly, or out of Egypt, these tall Europeans that we see. Now there's also shorter people in the area, and of course all the Jews are a shorter people, so now you have this huge variant. Cro-Magnon were a lot taller too, and then there were giants in the land in those days, and then after the big flood, after the big Sumerian flood, not the giant one, but yeah, there was after that too. Were there still Cro-Magnons left after the 10,500 year ago flood? Yeah, but they weren't Cro-Magnons, they were just tall, big old people, averaging over 6 foot in height, compared to people that were averaging 5'4", 5'5". You might find a few skeletons 5'7", 5'8", and if you think that's not a big difference, look at basketball versus a regular sized person, and it'll show you the difference. And there's your Goliath and so on. But so he was followed by another race from Egypt and of shorter stature, like the Ipwich man and the later Galley Hill man. So, okay, yeah. So there was this, they're having a mix of conjecture there. So now look here where he throws this in. The text underlined and read below, all too common instances where albino people have no compunctuation about shamelessly telling barefaced lies in open media. Well, if you'll look at this document, here's a Negro making a fake document that he inserts his own stuff into. How does that happen? Talking about albinos. Don't tell me TechINet has this crap. The text underlined and read below are all too common instances are albinos. Right. How pathetic. It's not typically known for, let's see. It is thought findings to be broadcast on Thursday as part of the BBC documentary, The Evidence for the First Known Black Person in Britain, predating the assumption by 150 years. So now he's trying to tell you that blacks were the first people, but then as evidence, he's talking about albino BS stories, and then he gets here and shows you that that really the truth be known, that the earliest one they've known has been 1190 and 1300, right in between those range, right? And this predates the first Negro we ever thought coming in by 150 years. Radiocarbon dating, right? And they remain perplexed how this man ended up being buried in a cemetery of a Frari. Denotes two things: he must have been converted to Christianity, that he must have been a person of wealth, or it's unlikely the man was a slave due to the fact that his remains showed that he had strong muscles and was quite healthy until his death. I think that's a stupid statement. Slaves did a lot of work, and they would end up becoming strong and been healthy until something happened. Quite often some flu or pneumonia would take somebody out, and they would look like, man, that's a big strong guy that got taken out. We see that a lot. So this is conjecture and just a bullshit thing again. But more fake surprises about Ipswich man. Dun dun dun. Ipswich man. Let's see if I can just, I don't have to read all this to you. An apparently African skeleton. Yes. Okay, yes. They're talking about Caucasian, endemic, North African people, not a Negroid, right? New evidence about British ancestry points to it. Bone analysis offers clue about true origins of mysterious skeleton facial construction. Painstaking reveals his face, not seen for centuries. The historical trail points to new evidence about British ancestry. In the case of an unexpected twist, they will discover the tragic truth about how he died. Well, this is saying that there is some African, North African endemic ancestry mixed into Europeans, and then a lot of it comes from the Proto-Indo-Europeans that come over and mix, and there is an endemic Caucasian race that's up through the area too. There were Cro-Mags and things, and you hear these stories about giants and the ancient stories of Odin and all this stuff, but let's keep going, man, because this is going to take me weeks at this rate. British anthropologists have been known and discussed the African origins of the first settlers of the British Isles since the mid-19th century. Yes, the non-Negroid endemic Caucasians that are still across all of North Africa and the Horn of Africa and so on. I don't know if I have to show you a map where it shows you where Negroids actually were at one time compared to where they are now, but and so they're just going to totally diss science, but then he's trying to use science but twist it, and then it's just sad. The underlying text above then obviously is barefaced lies, which is typical of modern albino scientific people. Well, but that wasn't even modern here. He goes back to old days. This has all been going along. So all scientific record for all time says no. And then he shows you a Negro with a huge amount of prognathism in his jaw, this simian look here that we'll see in a skull and a skeleton, and this bulbous forehead, nappy hair, things that are not found in Egyptian. And by the way, this guy is actually a admix. He has some admix. And he calls them Nilotic Negroes, showing original types of big heads found in Europe. No, that's not, they haven't found Negroes in Europe. Find that. You can't find that because it doesn't exist. But now you're going to say, well, they said that they had. So if I take this article about this Nilotic Negro where it says he has a big head and all this stuff, and I try to compare it to the Cro-Magnons they said that had a bigger head, then that means we was Cro-Magnon. No, and it doesn't work that way. Let's see here, his little cutout here, invaded the arts and became the Iberians in ancient times, inhabited the western and southern part of Europe, the northern part of Africa, and in fact all parts reach from the Mediterranean Sea. So there, just straightforward, he tells you. But no, he's going to try to tell you, no, they always blacks. They turned into albino white people due to a lack of sunlight and the way they didn't eat fish. He gets to the stupid stuff. And he goes way into it too. The Iberians in ancient times inhabited Europe, the northern parts of Africa, and the Mediterranean Sea, all the way around. There's no barrier. You wouldn't come down and hit Egypt and not just keep going around and up the Nile and find all the fertile stuff. It's a real common thing. What you wouldn't be able to do is go 3 times as far from the other way and come across a desert and a people that never did it, that's full of lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. The little dark Welshmen, the Scotch, and the black Celts to the west of the Shannon River in Ireland, as well as the same kind of men in Brittany and Aquitaine in France, the Guanches of the Canary Islands, and the Berbers in Africa, they are all probably the remnants of the race. And he's talking about Caucasians. When they talk about Black Dutch and so on, that's not a Negroid. That's tall, dark, and handsome. That's dark features as compared to the other people that might have brown hair, blonde hair, red hair, and lighter features in general more. That they understand at this time that they're looking at, and none of those are Negroids. Here's one for you, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Everybody says, oh man, that name's got a bad word in it. And no, it really doesn't, but it does mean black man running. But Schwarzen is black man and Egger means running. And he's not black, but he comes from a heritage of Black Dutch people that are these people that are talking about here. Not necessarily that he was a Dutch, but yeah, he comes from that area and he fits that bill, and none of that's a Negroid, but blacks want to try to attach onto it. They want to be white people very badly. You can tell this. It tells you the Teuton inhabited the country north of the Iberians. He was the phlegmatic in temperament, dull in intellect, but brave and warlike, and gave it to athletic exercises. He was a flaxen-haired, large-limbed giant, fat and stupid. His greatest glory was to have killed a large number of savage animals. Owing to their strength, bravery, and size, they were a conquering race, but did not have the genius to rule the lands they conquered. And of course, he just said flaxen-haired, and these are a blonde-haired people and so on, and these are the early Celts that were there that could have done something, but they were still somewhat tribal. But what he's also trying to tell you is that coming out of the last ice age, this place was such a land of plenty, they didn't need to do much. Kind of like the Negroids down in sub-Saharan Africa, only these people weren't near as primitive, but compared to the people that showed up, they sure as hell were. But there's a blending, and we can see that in genetics too. It wasn't that one got wiped out and none of these were Negroids. In fact, he tells you right here, they were self-reliant, willful, and independent. The intellect and genius of the people of Central Europe came from the people farther north, probably of the original Arian tribes. Their deities were Thor, Odin, Frigga, wife of Odin, and Wodan, and the Balder, and Wednesday, and Woden's Day, um, and Frey, and Friday. Um, the Basque are of a middle-sized complexion, robust and agile, and of a darker complexion than the people that he's been talking about. It says it right there, but you look at Basque, and they even have just olive skin. People are making small denotions of colors of Caucasians. Let me show that to you. Here's something that people don't usually know. Where is it? When we talk about Ethiopia, this is Greek Ethiopia right here, right? Ethiopia, Greek, Aethiops. Looky there. And they tell you that it first appears in there and everything. Okay, so what are we talking about? And it means sunburnt or burnt face. And whenever we look at the map here, it shows you all the areas. Well, the top's not even quite showing there, but it shows you all the areas that they describe them in Greek terms, and these are the people that made the definition. Therefore, this is what we go with, not what blacks want it to be real bad, and say that it's only these Ethiopians up here, this little country, which isn't even here. It's actually over here, right? And the Microbians really are supposed to be over here near Asia, but this is actually called Eastern Ethiopians quite a few times. And Masingetes, all this stuff is done in that way. It shows you that that is where they're talking about. Worse than that, there's actually terms in Greek, believe it or not, for white Ethiopians. Say what? What the hell would that be? Yeah, white Ethiopians. Right here. Look, top of the page. White Ethiopians. And where are they at? All over North Africa. Bam. All over North Africa. Here they're showing them to you. Luca Theopes. What is that? Oh, they're all over here. Uh-huh. Yeah. And they're still there today. You look at the Amazai and stuff, and it'll still show you. So, enough about that. Let me get on here. What are we getting into? Almost 30 minutes. I'm going to quit it here at a good spot, but let me get something more important now. Gotta get something out of what he says here. I really don't feel like I've gotten very far. So he tells you all of that. Let's see, in Odin, first inhabitants of southern Europe, the first inhabitants, probably from the Ice Age, drove them south. Some probably survived as cave dwellers, but a larger part perished. This would have been through the last Ice Age, coming out of it 10,000 BC. And then you realize that everybody then was more squished down towards the center of the world, more closer to the equator. And as it folded back, these people migrated back up into those areas. And then you wait a few thousand years, and then we come into what we're talking about, right? Of course. First inhabitants were a race of small men who did not average in height more than about 4 foot 5 inches. They were slight build with dark complexion. By dark complexion, he compared it right here. He just told you bastard dark. You look at them. Okay, so he's just telling you these people had. So this is what Cheddar Man was supposed to look like, not some mahogany shoe polish BS. Anyhow, they were cave dwellers and emanated from Lemuria. So this is when they had that going on with the idea of Atlantis and things going on, which had flooded up. And Hyperborea and all these areas that would have been 450 foot, a lot more land around whenever the sea was a lot lower because all the ice was trapped up. And apparently it seems now whenever a comet came fragmentary into the atmosphere and shattered all up and vaporized into that continental ice shelf, it caused the Younger Dryas event and this huge big catastrophe that everybody relates back to. And it's what's in your story about Bible and Noah and everything. But Noah's 3 kids are all 3 Caucasians. They didn't have some 3 race thing going on or anything silly. You still can't explain Amerindians, Eskimos, or any of that other crap, or even Asians out of that if you have it. So it's really not their story. Just like India's not the other people's story, although you find that they're attached and they're in their story. It says Aryans plain, they have the swastika, and it's not a bad thing. And that goes all the way back to Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal times and mammoth flutes with it scratched on there and things. It's not something that's from World War II and some stupid symbology from there. It's something they grabbed from a concept. let's continue. They were an African people, right? They found buried in their graves and everything, long burials. They were an African people. Oh, they were a Caucasian African people, and there appears to be evidence that sometimes practiced cannibalism. Now we realize the burial rites they had, it even tells you about it in ancient Greek stuff, that they would let dogs pull bodies around and do this weird stuff of these people in this area, and then they did ancestor veneration and popped the heads back off and covered them up. We find all these Canaanite burials now. They're buried in red ochre and stuff, and they're in a fetal position, a little round thing. It looks like a rebirthing of the womb, and they're all facing the east and all these things way back when. It's amazing. They already had this spirituality thing locked in, right, in the east. But anyhow, so that's the sun coming up in a rebirth. It said that the first people in Ireland were the Formations. They were a dark, stunted race, utterly savage, using rough, unwrought stone implements. As far as can be learned, they did not know the use of fire. It says they came from Africa on ships. And again, here we're talking about people that would have been like, your dwarves, if you will, these stocky people that just weren't as tall. And who's telling the story? Well, the tall people. So they're comparing him to that. If you would have had the 5'4" people telling the story, he would tell you that they were chunky, and these guys are giants. Right. And they had fire. There's fire. It goes back 165,000 years there. It shows settlement and people and things going on, but way primordial to this too. But these people knew fire and everything. But yeah, they had blunt weapons. You see all these things where they use war hammers and they use these things and stuff. They didn't use these sharpened weapons so much. And was it effective? Yeah, it was effective. Look what happened whenever the Romans and stuff came over, and Caesar and stuff, and tried to mess with them. It wasn't quite a good day for them. It would seem that at this period in the past, the land of Europe was of a higher elevation than in the present, and the present bed of the Straits of Dover and a large part of the North Baltic Sea and the Channel was, and it cuts off, but connected, is what they're trying to say. And what he didn't know at that time was that the ocean was 450 meters lower than it is, and there pretty much was connective, and you could get across there a whole lot easier, and so, and that's what we talk about, the Bering Ice Strait and all these things. But okay, so where are we at here? So historical data, I'm going to go into this real quick and then we're going to quit. Thus the Kuthanay or Picadoc of northern and southern Picts of Scotland are frequently distinguished by the Welsh chroniclers as the Gwydyl Duan and the Gwydyl Gwyn are black and fair Gauls. And what black meant was not Negroids, and not even really the tan skin, more of the blondish people and that. And listen, people, there has never been a race of white people that all of them are blonde. Even if you go to Sweden, and where it's really targeted, it's still not all blonde. It's just a much higher number there than, say, even in Europe itself, which has somewhat of a mix of that and so on. If you take a bunch of blonde people and you put them on an island and you wait for a few generations, they all have dark-haired and still blue-eyed and green-eyed and brown-eyed kids. And depending on genetics from there, it keeps going from there. So how you get a predominantly blonde society is from targeting somewhat, and genetics plays into it too, and then how things play out. But it has nothing to do with Negroids. Again, they don't have any of these traits. In fact, whenever confronted with it, they call, those are all recessive traits. Whites are recessive, Negroids are dominant. And it's like, yeah, that's terms that we use for genetics, and it doesn't mean ooh rah. It means certain things trump certain things out. And in other words, you can have all this little variation and ruin it by just putting in a little of that, and it'll ruin all those features. It'll try to darken all those features. And at one time they thought, yeah, that maybe has something to do with how there's a lot of darker skinned people. At one time they thought the Moors had a lot of Negroid influx into Spain. Like people, of course, the racist guys, they go, we're to Europe, and they came into Spain. Spain's not Europe. Anyhow, and now genetics proves the fact that no, that wasn't true. And when you read the accounts of the Moors, and they tell you they castrated most of the males there and disposed of them after use, and that they were not Moors. They were starting of the Islamic slave trade that began well over 900 years before the Americas were even found. Guys, before I get any deeper on this, I'm going to leave it right here. We're going to be all in Scotland and talking about these blonde and nomadic people in Scudia and how they had came from North Africa, these people had thought, and which actually ties into what I was telling you in the old days and how the exodus happened out of there in Scotia herself. So if you haven't done so yet, like, share, and subscribe. And watch for it. Part 2 is going to be coming up in just a minute. You should have got the notification for all of these coming up back to back, and I am going to compile them all and pump them out. Part 2 should be coming up in the top left-hand corner, and in the top right-hand corner will be something else starting out. Once we get the series done, I'll be able to go back on each one and copy and put on the other one to where they will go from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and so on. Anyhow, part 1 down, part 2 coming. Peace.